Thanks to the foresight of the Pendleton folks, we decided to launch this discussion that in a format that was more oriented toward conversation. So we really don't want this to be a webinar. We don't want it to be us speaking, you listening, one-way conversation. We want it to be interactive. And that's why we've asked you to turn your mics off, keep your videos on. It's almost the opposite of what we get elsewhere. So I'll let Guy Tessler, the Pendleton Group, give us a few ground rules about the discussion and more about the format. And then Jorge will do some remarks about Pendleton, and I'll jump back in. Hopefully we'll have the fit over at that point.
Awesome.
Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, everybody, welcome to this conversation. We had our previous 5 conversations were very productive, and it's not just about the exchanging of our ideas in the moment, but it's about creating follow-up activity, bringing up issues or ideas, and then implementing it again in the real world. A lot of activities have resulted from this interaction, and that's what we're looking for. Not just an exchange of ideas or the status of this at this exact moment, but having some actionable conversations and relationships moving forward. And that is I guess, the essence or the differentiator of this type of conversation. Just wanted to let you know that we are recording this, and we'll be sharing it to the people who are in the group and posting it. So if you have anything that you do not want other people to hear, we can remove that to a separate conversation. So please be aware of that. Jorge, please tell us a bit about the Pendleton Group.
Thank you, Guy. Well, good morning, everybody. And as always, it's great to
and I forgot to say happy birthday to Trevor.
That's right. So we all have, hey, happy birthday, Trevor. Are you going to bring cake for everybody?
Thanks, everybody. Getting old here. Unfortunately not. I wish I had it to show you. We were planning to make one today. We'll see.
We could have sang happy birthday. But anyhow, thank you for spending part of the morning together here today and having a conversation about this topic about supply chain, and particularly within the context of what's going on right now. And how companies are adapting. We got a good selection of people that can share on that experience. But importantly too is how highlighting the importance of those global connections, how important they are in those relationships that are so important for us at Georgia and for Metro Atlanta and for each of the companies. We'll be talking about that. Pendleton Group, it's a group of us that are a group of professionals in the economic development field. We work very closely with communities, with organizations, with companies to develop and deploy business and economic development strategy and connectivity, and developing those relationships that make things click and make things happen. Guy and I specifically work very closely with International Connection, and Craig Lester, managing partners, here with us. And he'll introduce himself when we go around. So we work closely with those companies that call Georgia home, and foreign companies particularly, and domestic companies trying to explore the foreign markets and leverage those connections. So you can learn more about the group and who we are and what we do at pendletonatlanta.com. I encourage you to do that. And we're here to help you out and develop those relationships. So Trevor, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jorge. And I think one thing I love about these conversations is it's encouraging us to look at, like you said, international ties as a potential benefit or advantage versus the general tenor of the conversation these days tends to be around how do we retrench and pull ourselves back and protect ourselves from the rest of the world in that way. And I think we've tried to frame this as a conversation about how engaging can actually help us become more resilient. So I've enjoyed that. And done it across various industries. We've done cybersecurity and an earlier thing that focused on air cargo. We've done some things on foreign investment. So I've really enjoyed this series, and you can actually go back and watch all the previous ones if you'd like. But again, not a webinar, so we're going to jump in and have everybody who has not participated in the past introduce themselves, hopefully to get y'all engaged and talking, so that there's no deer in the headlights look when we come to the more conversational aspect of this. So I'll start with Scott Ellyson, who's kind of going to be one of our featured speakers today. Scott, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Keep it very brief so we can get everybody in.
Morning, everybody. Scott Ellyson. I'm the founder of East West Manufacturing. We're a global manufacturing company. We specialize in, we make products for lots of different industries: medical, robotics, IoT, et cetera. We've got, 2,500 employees now. We have 14 facilities in 6 countries. And we're always looking for manufacturing arbitrage, and we've been expanding a lot in North America in the last few years.
Great, thanks. David?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is David Joyner. I'm with OMP, and at OMP we are a technology and services provider in the supply chain planning space, which means a company like Scott's would have an organization that would leverage our technology and our consulting services to optimize how they're going to source their materials, procure any goods that they're going to be selling, and how they're going to make them, where they're going to make them, how they're going to distribute them in the most profitable manner.
Great. Jim?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for hosting us, Trevor, and the Pendleton Group. My name is Jim Caffey. I'm a former Bell South executive, but started my own company, the Caffey Group, that has 11 associates concentrating on bringing companies to Atlanta. We've been successful at bringing 47 companies from overseas to the United States. I'll reference one, the Concilium Technology, which changed its name for an Atlanta branding, but we had got a national partnership with AT&T Mobility, and in 3 locations ran that up to 110 employees here in the United States, and from 20 to 80 in Northern Ireland. We've been successful at bringing 5 or 6, let's just say, successful trade missions out of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. I also work in an ex officio matter for the European Union here in the Southeast, and are asked to handle the visits of their ambassador and also companies coming out of France and the UK. I have also operated on behalf of the Israeli government here in the Southeast on certain matters particular to the pressures on the ports and the protests and attempt to boycott things coming out of Israel, and flew with Council Generals of Israel on the Southeast into Ireland to meet with the labor unions on the docks. So I'm very pleased to be here and have experienced with the Pendleton Group, and this is the right group to be dealing with here in Atlanta.
Thank you so much, Jim. Craig, I'm going to skip over people who've already attended in the past. I'm assuming that y'all remember seeing each other around, just in the interest of time. I think, Craig, this is your first one, though.
Yeah. Hey, Trevor, and good morning, everybody. I'm Craig Lesser. I've been elevated to the post of chairman of the Pendleton Group. I think is a way of making my colleagues at Pendleton, they've tried to get me on the exit ramp of some sort. It's really, really good to see Guy and Jorge actually working today. I'm very proud of seeing them, and I so much appreciate what you, Trevor, have done in working with our team and moving this initiative forward. I won't say more about Pendleton because Jorge and Guy have done that, but I so much appreciate seeing everybody, and certainly, Jim, appreciate your remarks as well just now as an endorsement of the Pendleton Group. we look forward to working with each and every one of you to pursue your objectives and get things done. Thank you, Trevor.
Great. Kay?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good to be here. As you can see from behind me and my backdrop, I'm at Georgia Tech. I am the Dean of Ivan Allen College. Formerly, I was also the chair of the School of Public Policy. Amanda Shalindra is on the board of the School of Public Policy, so she extended the invitation for me to join this type of conversation. Happy to be here. I'm an economist by training. My PhD is in economics, and the last time I worked on supply chain work was when I used to do research on the automotive industry back in the 90s, and at MIT on the International Motor Vehicle Program. So one of my specialties is automotive, but I've done a lot of other things since then. I've been a professor for more than 30 years.
Great. Thanks, Kay. Kira?
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Trevor. My name is Kira O'Flynn. I'm the Consul General of Ireland here in Atlanta. I'm relatively new to the post, so I'm really grateful to have this chance to participate today. I see some familiar faces who I've met in my rounds already, and lots of new faces, so really happy to make the connections. I took up my post here in August, so moving at a very interesting time. Our consulate has been here in Atlanta for about 10 years. Obviously, in terms of our economic links, we work very closely with the economic agencies from Ireland that are here, the IDA. I'm not sure if they're on this call, but I'm sure some of you have had dealings with them before. We have a great VP, Emma Mitchell, here, and their job is to help companies looking to invest in Ireland. We have a strong relationship between the state of Georgia and Ireland already. There's about 40 Irish companies active here and nearly 30 companies from Georgia active in Ireland. So the links are there, but one of my missions in my time here is really to look to develop them further and develop our links and our relationships. Thanks.
Great. And I have to give a shameless plug. I'm going to get to spend 2 straight days on calls with Kira because Atlanta's hosting one of our consular conversations tomorrow with the Consuls General of Ireland, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So I'm going to put the link shamelessly in the chat. If y'all want to join us, you're welcome to register. It's free for anybody that subscribes to Global Atlanta, and you should already be getting it anyway. So I'll jump to Cesar. I don't think you've been on one of these calls yet, Cesar.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Trevor. It's been a while, but it's great to see so many familiar faces. My name is Cesar Bence. I'm the Deputy Director for the City of Atlanta Office of International Affairs, and our role is to position Atlanta globally as a hub for commerce, education, tourism, and diplomacy. And I oversee our economic diplomacy portfolio, which includes FDI attraction and trade promotion, as well as our new global sports initiative, which aims to leverage, all our great sports, whether you're a fan or not, but it aims to leverage Atlanta sports to promote the city. So yeah, it's great to see so many familiar faces, and thank you to the Pendleton Group for facilitating this conversation and keeping us all together. I can't wait to have the chance to see you all in person again.
Yeah. And we will be hearing from Marco Usato later. Marco, we'll bring you in a little bit. Speaking of the Dutch consulate, we've got Koosje de Vries here, and she is going to introduce herself.
Good morning. Well, thank you. Sorry for being late. I was ending another webinar. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Koosje de Vries. I'm the Deputy Consul General for the Netherlands, and the Consulate General has opened their offices only a year, well, almost a year, 2 years ago in March 2019. And we have 5 states which we represent in the Netherlands. We represent in 5 states: Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama. And our goal is to accompany Dutch businesses towards the United States, investments, and responding to all the questions they have about the Southeast. And I have in my portfolio logistics, and that's why I was very interested, and thanks to my Irish colleague, I was able to join this getting together. So I'm very looking forward to hear what is going on.
Certainly no shortage of logistics links between Atlanta and the Netherlands.
And supply chains, of course. Sorry.
Definitely. Yeah, we could have a whole conversation on that. But Dexter?
Yes, I'm Dexter Caffey. Nice to meet you. I'm a real person. Nice to meet you all. I actually was introduced to this through Guy and Jorge, who I met, here in Atlanta on various trips to Israel. So I'm excited about being on here and listening to everyone here. And so I own a company called Smart Eye Technology that specializes in using biometrics to authenticate a person when they actually try to access a document. And so that's what we do here in Atlanta. And so we're a startup here. And so we're doing international business. Our software was actually created in Israel. So we're, always interested in finding out more about dealing in international markets. We're international on day one. So that's why I'm excited to listen.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we've covered everyone who is new or completely new. So we'll go ahead and jump into the conversation. Scott, I kind of want to start with you. You've been, like I said earlier, been gracious over the years letting this nosy journalist poke around in your various factories in places like Vietnam and China. So I appreciate that. We spent a lot of our time in the past talking about China and Asia. But you really, over this last, say, 2 years, I think that's about accurate, have really expanded throughout the globe. Can you talk about some of the trends that have enabled that expansion or driven that expansion to sourcing from various locations, not just east-west, but east, west, 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 with your various facilities in Costa Rica and the U.S. now?
Yeah, the transition over starting 20 years ago, and we were trying to find areas where we could manufacture most competitively for our customers. And we're in a lot of things we do is in the space of high-tech electronics, industrial controls, medical devices, robotics. And, in the early days, for me, that would be in the mid 90s. I mean, China was hard to compete with. I mean, everything made sense for China. And then we started seeing China get more expensive. We saw the path they were on. And so in the early 2000s, we expanded into Vietnam, and that was quite successful for us. We started by doing rubber products in Vietnam, some industrial textiles, and then we built our first plant in Vietnam in 2007. And the great thing about that is, while the supply chain in Vietnam was very weak, anything we couldn't find in Vietnam, our China operations were able to source and procure for us and then ship to Vietnam. And so that model worked quite well for us. And then in Vietnam has really evolved into this high volume, high tech, and we're probably, even today, we're probably one of the more advanced, what I would call box build or electronic manufacturers in Vietnam. We've changed our model a little bit, where we recognized we were doing a lot of high volume work, but we were never involved very early on with products through their developmental stages and the high mix, low volume. And so in 2016, we decided to expand our manufacturing footprint in North America. And that's when we started acquiring manufacturing sites across the US. We just completed our 7th acquisition 2 weeks ago in Wisconsin. So we own 6 facilities in the US, which includes another one we acquired a company in Costa Rica as our nearshore operation, and we're close to acquiring another one in Canada right now to build out our North American footprint. And the advantages we see there, it's pretty interesting, where we now have this, what I would call a pretty mature and established supply chain in Asia. And so we're able to help the companies we're acquiring by being able to source globally. Often the companies, if you're a $50 million electronic manufacturer in the US, chances are you don't have a very sophisticated supply chain team. You don't have the kind of leverage you need to be procuring and negotiating contracts at corporate levels with some of these big distributors. And so we bring that in, and we can make these companies more competitive. And then also we've got about 150 engineers in the company, so we can help these companies run more efficiently, operate better. And then we're excited because now the companies that these U.S. operations are supporting, usually they're doing a limited amount of work for them, and we can offer a much bigger, what I would call a menu of services. You know, East West has design capabilities, we have distribution capabilities, and so when we're speaking with a company like a Honeywell or a Johnson Controls or an Eaton Corporation, where they were just doing a limited amount of work with these U.S. operations, now we can do a lot more for them under one umbrella. But what's also interesting is, you know, we're trying to build out these supply chains in North America, and a lot of them have just essentially been gutted over the last 20 years, and everything moving to China. And now with China becoming more expensive and with the tariffs, a lot of our customers are trying to figure out how to you know, either bring things to this hemisphere or to move them into other areas where they're not so dependent on China. And you know, we tend to be a great solution for that. And you know, we're looking at, you know, like in Costa Rica, we're investing heavily there because we can be very cost competitive, equivalent to what you would, you know, actually, I think we're more competitive now than China out of Costa Rica. But the supply chains are actually very immature. We have to bring in everything from China. Costa Rica has a free trade agreement with China, so products can be shipped in duty free. And then we have, of course, a free trade agreement with Costa Rica and the U.S. And so that tends to be a great solution for moving products around and eliminating tariffs and taking advantage of lower cost wages, but also being quite logistically convenient. As I like to say, I can take a flight in the morning and be in Costa Rica for lunch, which is really nice. And so, yeah, we've a lot of things moving around, and in the U.S., we're excited about that because we can respond a lot faster to our customers, turnarounds, and using all of our global strength to support them. It's making them more competitive.
Yeah, you said that this really started in earnest in the U.S. in 2016. I'm assuming that's just a coincidence and didn't have anything to do with it.
No,
point,
it was all economics, honestly. I mean,
yeah, but my question is, I mean, you've sort of built your whole company around, at least in the early days, around the China plus one kind of idea that, you know, you need to have a strong base in China, but you also need like Vietnam or India or Indonesia or somewhere like that to kind of offset the rising costs that people are seeing in China. But now we see a lot of other effects, or other hindrances or hurdles, like you mentioned, the tariffs. And also now we've got COVID-19, which threw a bigger wrench into supply chain. So I guess my question is, like, is China going anywhere? You know, people act as though it's an either or, and you built your whole premise around it being both and, that you can still source some goods in China where it makes sense, but you can also diversify.
I mean, there are lots of things we do today still where there is no other option than China. Globally. I mean, the best example I have is we do quite a bit in the way of high pressure die cast aluminum. These are highly machined parts that are used in robotics. It's actually been the largest robotics. I can't say the customer, but it's been the largest robotics project in the world for probably the last 5 years. And we make essentially all the metal parts that go in those robots. And the capital, the size of the machines that are used to make these parts are, they're big. I mean, they 4,500 ton die cast machine needs its own building, and there's basically 5 in the world, and there's 2 of them inside the company that we use to make these parts. There's several hundred CNC machines with several hundred CNC operators. There's nowhere else to have those parts made competitively. And even if you wanted to spend $500 million in capital in the U.S. to set up an infrastructure like this, the talent's not available to do it. There's really nowhere you wouldn't be competitive. And so that's something where we might look to set up set up capabilities elsewhere that could support 10% or 20% of that capacity, but displacing that and moving that anywhere else, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in your tariff exemption filing that you which is always entertaining reading. I was searching for Atlanta companies and that were applying for those. Yeah. So how much has changed with regard to the overarching trend due to COVID? I mean, has it just accelerated everything?
Yeah, it's the way if the tailwinds were, for us were 10 miles an hour, they've probably increased to 20 or 25 miles an hour, right? So we're getting a lot more phone calls from folks that are solely sourced in China. The thing is, in a lot of these products like medical instruments and a lot of these industrial controls, that the investment and qualification expense to set up these products is immense, and nobody wants to go through that again. I mean, it's painful, and so to justify moving that to somewhere else is exhaustive. And so what we're seeing is people aren't moving these types of products if they're already established and in place, but they are, if there's a next gen version coming out or a new product, they're trying to establish new areas to source those products. And so we're getting a lot of calls around that. To be a second source for something, an industrial company that would be already established in China.
Makes sense. Tell us about just the early days of COVID in China, because at that point we didn't really know how extensive it was going to be. We thought it might be isolated there, and you have not only your own factory, your joint venture factory, but you've got, I think, over something like 60 people in your office that source from hundreds of factories around China. So how did you kind of reach out and adapt over that time?
Pretty stressful. So I was in China the end of January. I always go over there for Chinese New Year, and I heard it going on, and they shut down Wuhan so fast, and I think that was happening right when I was leaving. And all that happened right at Chinese New Year. So everybody had already, gotten on the buses and trains. And then China did a really smart thing, is they just basically stopped all mass transit for 2 weeks after Chinese New Year. And typically coming out of Chinese New Year, it takes a couple weeks to get ramped up to full speed again. And it took us probably, instead of 2 weeks, it was 6 weeks before we could get back to sustainable production. That was a pretty stressful time, because we've got supply chains that run very tight, and if things aren't running back up to full scale, we shut down assembly lines all over the world. And so we were getting daily reports out of all of our key suppliers on how many employees they would have in their plants, and a lot of it was either they couldn't get back because of the limitations in mass transit, or the local government was restricting the number of employees they could have in their factory at any given time. Those two were coming into play. And we were actually, in fact, I had an article in the Wall Street Journal where we were sending buses out to regions of China and bringing workers back, helping these factories that we don't own, but helping them bring workers back to the plants so that we could start scaling up the workforces. And so all that happened very quickly before, like I said, 6 weeks. And so that was a big sigh of relief. And, in terms of the spread, China did, as we all know, a great job of containing it. And, culturally, you would have folks policing, neighborhood police, volunteers going out and just randomly picking people on the street and taking their temperatures, and people telling one another to wear masks and all that that's how things work over in China. So, so that recovered. And then from there, we had, the problem quickly shifted to the US, where we started seeing much higher incident rates in our factories, and we had to put a lot of emphasis. We have about 700 workers in the US, in our US operations, and we've had outbreaks in every one of our facilities. And fortunately, if we've had a case, we've done a great job, tracking it and quarantining folks, and we have not had any cases spread within any of our plants. And so that's been a ton of work to do that. And we've got a pretty good process in place now, and everybody's spaced out in the facilities and so on. But really, so far we've been operating quite well.
Good. Well, David, I wanted to bring you in here because I feel like, OMP probably does more, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like more longer term planning around supply chains and technologies that need to be implemented. But what sort of frantic calls have you been getting from clients or existing or new clients that now see air freight going through the roof, or see the inability to get something from one place and having to shift to another? What sort of things have you been hearing?
I think Scott sort of hit on this theme where we're doing the same things we were before COVID, just a lot faster now, a lot more often. I don't remember how we did things before COVID with our customers because it's been so intense. But yeah, and we do long-term, 5-10 year supply chain planning with our customers. But we also do, the shortest term down in the individual factory, down to the production line planning with our customers. And we give them, it's a buzzword these days, it's a digital twin of their supply chain. And what that is it's the digitalization of their assets, their transportation capabilities, production capabilities, sourcing capabilities. In addition to that, we build in logic with them. The most important part, logic around how that physical supply chain is going to behave when they make certain decisions. So, air freight versus, cheaper forms of freight, things like that. What's going to be the impact all the way through the supply chain from, sourcing of raw materials to the delivery to the customer in that final mile.
Can you talk about, and everybody, y'all feel free to jump in, wave your hand. I'm looking at everybody through the gallery view. So if you want to wave your hand and to ask a question, please jump in, or send me a quick chat message and we can get your question in. Or if you just want to say something, speak up. But I wanted to ask you, David, Scott's whole argument seems to be partially around geography, right? Having diversification in different parts of the world. But I was kind of curious, is it really about geography, or is it more about access and infrastructure? I mean, how should companies be thinking about it, about diversification? Should it be a move back to the Americas play, or should it be looking at just the most optimal places in general?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So from a supply chain planning perspective, a resilient supply chain is one where you can go into that digital twin of your global supply chain and shut down a particular capability. We were working with a very well-known brand name pharmaceutical manufacturer back when the pandemic, I don't know if it's a pandemic yet, but when the virus was still just in China. And they came to us and said, what do we do? We've got to shut down all this capacity in China, both in manufacturing capacity and distribution capacity and everything else. And so we were able to help them simulate around that, at least figure out what's the next best thing that they can do. And you made a point earlier, I think, about it's not necessarily about geography, but it's about how mature are your supply chains? How quickly can you move goods from? It might be difficult to move them 100 miles compared to a mature supply chain where it's easier to move the same stuff 1,000 miles.
Definitely. You mentioned pharmaceuticals. I mean, that's been one of the areas that seems to be ripe for this whole reshoring idea. The idea that we're too reliant on external geographies, particularly China, for active ingredients. And but what's going to go into making our drug supply chains more resilient in the U.S.? I mean, it seems that with vaccines in particular, we have the issue of needing more cold storage, right, in order to get that around the country. But are we sort of ready for that, or do we need quite a bit of infrastructure investment?
I'm not sure if there's a better expert than me in here, but we are, in my opinion, we're not ready for that at all. I mean, there's a term in life sciences, API, it's the active pharmaceutical ingredient. It's kind of the most important ingredient in a drug, and there are several very base medicines that are only made in China. The API is only made in China. So Yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure investment that I think that needs to be made to make that supply chain more resilient. You know, that's what resilience means in supply chain, is the ability to roll with the punches like this virus and get that API from an alternate source.
I wanted to ask maybe Scott too, and maybe even Regina, if you've been able to join us now. How are companies changing the way they design products for its effects on their supply chain? For instance, like if you're using aluminum versus another metal, I mean, or you know, a rubber part versus a plastic part. I'm not, you know, obviously I'm not that well versed in industrial design, but it seems that you would think through at the earliest phases where you might need to source the products or the parts from in order to design the end product. But Scott, are you seeing things shift that early on?
Yeah, and that it does take a lot of time to do that. You know, one of my favorite examples around supply chain. So we own a motor factory in Changzhou, China, and Changzhou is a city about the size of Atlanta, 4 million folks. There's roughly 200 motor factories inside of Changzhou. We carry on average 4 days of inventory in the plant, just 4 days. And there's, I don't know how many suppliers we have, but there's probably 20 that are shipping to us daily. For us, there's probably in a $30 motor, there's probably $1 of labor. To move that motor, and I've tried to move it to Mexico, I've tried to move it to other regions. Instead of having 4 days of inventory, I probably have to increase that to 45 days of inventory. And the capital cost of that alone is millions of dollars. And even if my labor costs, if I moved it to move it to the U.S., my dollar in labor would probably go to $5 in labor. And to move it really anywhere else where I didn't have that captive supply chain would be really very expensive for us. And so a lot of products fall into that category where the supply chains are so matured. To move them anywhere else becomes just, it's not just the labor cost or the per unit cost, it's the capital cost on top of it. So in the case of motors, to follow up on your question, Trevor, we're coming up with some technology on motors where we're not so dependent on, we're using new processes. For example, if you look at most traditional motors, there's a metal housing, there's metal end bells, aluminum end bells. Well, we're looking at motors where instead of it being encapsulated in metal, it's going to be injection molded, where you're basically just going to take the part in and you're going to be able to put plastic over the whole thing. And there's a bunch of advantages that you get out of that. And we've had to hire a development team in Atlanta to put this together for us. Well, that should give us, it's a new technology. It should give us advantages on the manufacturing front and help us so that we can move the supply chain around, because injection molding, you can do that almost anywhere without much cost.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Kira, I wanted to bring you in if you want to talk about this. I meant to ask you in the discussion about pharmaceuticals. I remember covering a town hall that your ambassador did, talking about how important Ireland was in the pharmaceutical supply chain for the U.S. And we tend to look at these things as in terms of a zero-sum game, and even if you do, Ireland is most of Ireland's, or a lot of Ireland's exports in the pharmaceutical field come from U.S.-based companies, and you know, even though it counts as an Irish export, it's really making American firms competitive. Did you want to say anything about how Ireland's thinking about its role in the transatlantic supply chains?
Sure, thanks, Trevor. Yes, certainly. Like, we have a high degree of integration, as we say, between US and Irish companies and between our exports in the pharmaceutical sector. I was looking up a few figures before this meeting and seeing that Ireland is now the third largest exporter of pharmaceuticals globally, and the second in the EU, which is, you know, quite huge for such a small country. Our population is about 5 million. We are very keen to position ourselves as a trusted partner for the US and US companies, as a safe base, as an entry point to the European Union, obviously, especially in the context of Brexit. Huge capacity there in the pharma sector. One of the interesting examples actually that has been in the news in the last week or two is Regeneron, the US company that provided the antibody treatment, or one of the antibody treatments that President Trump took in the last week. They have a huge manufacturing plant, or huge by our standards, in the southwest of Ireland in Limerick. And they employ about 1,000 Irish people there at the moment. They're looking to increase that employment. I saw that there's going to be another 400 jobs there very soon. And precisely, just listening to what some of the people on this call are saying, I think precisely with that diversification in mind, in order to focus on the COVID treatments, the antibodies, there's other production that's being moved to Ireland, so that those interlinkages and being able to move things smoothly between plants are something that's really high on our agenda, and something that we want to promote for sure.
Definitely. Thank you so much. David, I want to jump back to you. What sort of, when you think about supply chain innovation or integrating technology into your supply chain that will make you more resilient or more able to, for instance, track your goods in the process of getting them here, what are kind of the main technologies that are being integrated? And I may want to bring in Marco Bussato as well after this.
Well, the main technology is one you're probably already tired of hearing about. It's AI, artificial intelligence. It's been a buzzword for a while, but it's a real deal in supply chain technology. We've actually been using it for a long time, but it's finally been coined a cool phrase in pop culture, so everybody knows what it means now. But we're using it in supply chain technology to do to try to achieve what's called autonomous planning. So very similar to like your Tesla or your smart car for your EVs. They're using machine learning and AI technology to make decisions for drivers, and we're doing the same thing in supply chain planning to find decisions that we can automate through technology, so that the humans are able to enjoy their ride, so to speak, in a planning activity like you do in a Tesla, and be able to think bigger picture in supply chain planning and not spend so much time burning their brain cells crunching numbers that we can now make technology crunch.
Yeah, definitely. Marco, I know you work with a lot of governments and folks that are doing infrastructure projects, and you've had this focus on Industry 4.0 technology and smart cities and connected devices. What sorts of innovations are you seeing both from the company side and from the infrastructure side to help boost this resilience?
Yeah, great question, Trevor, and again, happy to be here and see many familiar faces. I mean, there's tremendous innovation that we experienced actually also through Point A, the initiative we joined on the supply chain, especially on the IoT and the sensoring. Just to name a few, actually, I don't know if Steve Modi is here with us today, but Locator X is a very innovative technology they're bringing to the market, and something that probably will revolutionize the whole way of tracking assets globally, or companies like Controlant, especially focused on the cold chain, so not just for food and beverage, but also for the pharmaceutical. So we will see, I think, in the next year, some technology that will actually revolutionize the way we can trace all type of assets up to the individual product in some cases, which was something absolutely unimaginable a few years back. And not only, as you mentioned, to the product level, but also to the assets and infrastructure. So now we're capable also to see how physical asset will be able to evolve over time. So we're not thinking about physical things that remain constant, but we'll be able to, as David mentioned, to have these digital twins everywhere. So not just on the product itself, which was quite common set of technologies, but on the production systems and on the physical facilities, installations. So we will have this digital continuity among all different elements of the supply chain. So the capability of tracing everything, it will be possible in the next few years.
Interesting. Yeah, Yep,
Trevor,
go ahead, Jacobus.
if I may, in the spirit of guys, hope that we get a conversation here instead of a webinar. We have various elements here. David talked about dependency, for instance, an API on geographies because of where the bases are. Scott talked a little bit about the same thing in terms of manufacturing capacity. We see technology and its role now in thinking about supply chain management. There are lots of political and geopolitical and national security reasons and pandemic response reasons to think about resiliency in the supply chains. But when I listen to Scott and David to some extent here, we are talking about very powerful economics that has shaped current supply chains. So granted, there are many reasons to want to reconsider this and rethink this and make this more resilient, but this is not an inexpensive proposition. To what extent will we find, as the immediate concern of pandemic going down, that the economics will drive us back to where we are? Are we talking about on the grand scheme of things, a 10% increase in overall cost, 20% increase in overall cost, 50% in the overall cost by making these supply chains resilient? Just how viable is something I think we clearly need to be do, but how much is this going to cost?
Yeah, and that sort of echoes a comment or a question that Ani had made to Scott too. Just what's the realistic prospects for just mass nearshoring or insourcing or whatever you want to call it? My personal thought would be that it's going to move, but it's going to move in a way that's cost effective, because that's just how things naturally go. It may not be China, it may be another place, but it's not necessarily all going to come back to the U.S. But I want to hear Scott's thoughts on that.
I'd love to put some perspective on this. So
sure.
So Jacobus, we own 7 factories now in the U.S. And when I look at costs to operate in any place in the world, I don't look at direct labor rates. I look at it in terms of fully burdened cost divided by direct labor hours, right? So that's what I call a fully burdened. What does it cost per hour to run the plant, right? So in the U.S., all of our plants operate somewhere between $60 and $70 an hour. And this is in a high-tech, skilled labor workforce. That equivalent hour in China is today about $10 an hour, maybe 15. In Costa Rica, it's about $10 an hour. So my rate in Costa Rica now is less. However, my logistics costs out of Costa Rica, even though it's closer, are 3 or 4 percentage points higher than China. And in Vietnam, I'm operating at about $4 to $5 an hour. So about half the rate of China. India is probably somewhere between Vietnam and India, but in China. But what we're finding in India and in some of the other places is the capital is just not there. So if I'm getting 60-day payment terms out of China, most of our suppliers in India are asking us for cash in advance. And most of the suppliers we're finding in India can't handle anywhere near the kind of volume that we're able to push through some of our China sources. And so I've not yet seen, we've had one customer that has looked to put some percentage of their manufacturing in North America, but the vast majority are trying to find other low-cost regions to move into. And so when I think about China, the CFOs of most companies in the US have seen a pretty attractive return on capital investment for what they've done in China for the last 15 or 20 years. And I'm not aware of really anywhere, with perhaps the exception of Vietnam, where you can find an attractive ROI to set up your investment, if there's significant capital involved. In most cases, if you're bringing it back to the US or even anywhere in this hemisphere, it's going to be a negative ROI on your CapEx. And that's just not something that we've had to deal with before. And so the way you're going to measure yourself against that is, what's my risk? And you're not going to make it wholesale. You're going to you're going to put your toe in the water. You're going to start to grow it, but it's going to take a lot of time.
So just take that one step further. So clearly that is one reason why we find ourselves where we are. And when we start looking at resiliency and moving to Costa Rica and to Vietnam, there's the second challenge that you faced in China, and that is labor cost increase as this is happening. And few places have the scale China has in order for many companies to do this on a large scale. If you do this in Costa Rica, if many people do this in Costa Rica, that number goes like that, you know? So there's a whole calculus here that, and I think we need to understand this if we're thinking about resiliency in the supply chains.
Yeah, there is no one solution, is what we're finding out. Every solution is going to be dependent on the product and what is required to put that product together and where the raw materials are coming from. What's the complexity of the supply chain? You know, it used to be, I would say, you know, we would follow the Taiwanese because they were brilliant at setting up. You know, they started they moved everything from Taiwan to China, and then they started moving into Vietnam and into now they've got a lot of operations in other low-cost regions. But you're starting with textiles, that's pretty easy. If you want to set up a textile plant in Cambodia, you just buy a bunch of sewing machines, it's low-cost capital, you drop it in place, and you kind of build the infrastructure from there. But now it's going everywhere. It's just spreading from China used to be the best source, but now based on the product, it just depends, you know, and so that's fun to figure out, but it's on a case-by-case basis.
I'm interested, Regina, have you discussion between your membership? You have been holding a lot of meetings with your membership lately and visits. Has it been an issue?
Supply chain specifically?
No, yeah, particularly what we're talking about, the cost of resilience.
Yes, and it's interesting, as I was listening to Scott, I realized I will say this, Scott, you are a much, much larger company than most of the companies. I'm sure you would agree that the most manufacturers that we know are small to mid-size. So they don't have, to your point, that large mature supply chain, most of them. And so yesterday we had a conversation with someone, actually two companies, and one of them, Trevor, you visited with me a few months ago, that they were able, and they did, when they pivoted operations early COVID, to make a product based on a diversification of a local supply chain that they didn't even know existed. So they're trying to bring things back domestically. And Scott, I hear what you say about the cost and keeping it low, but to some people and some companies, it's just important to them to make it here and to have everything made here. And that might not be popular with everyone, but that's just this week, that's what I'm hearing. Now, next week it could change and be totally different.
You know, what we see, Regina, is you know, with the bigger companies and their strategic supply chain guys, they typically don't get involved on products unless the revenue is at a certain level.
I can understand.
So, you know, once in my mind, what I see as the tipping point is usually $1 million a year. If you get to $1 million a year, then they start thinking about, well, where does it make sense to invest the time to set that product up in a region where it can be very competitive. But once you get into the higher mix, low volume, things that can be automated, you know, the cost becomes less important. In fact, the costs go up considerably if you're moving it to a region that's takes a lot more resources to support.
And I can understand that.
Yeah, we also have to think about, you know, the political landscape, the workforce issues, right? Like you know, it doesn't matter if you can have an injection molding or CNC machine here if you can't find someone to run it, right? So, especially someone that's going to stay around and you know, be super competent. So, Guy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think another angle of this whole puzzle or balance is the end price to the consumer. So I would ask, do we think that the consumer will be eventually the person or the entity that will be paying for the increased resiliency in the supply chain? And how would that have a larger ripple effect on life?
Yeah, David, you seem to nod your head in there.
Yeah, I think that's just a simple answer. Yes, I would say in the end, we consumers are going to pay for it. It's this discussion. I'm glad Jacoba started it because we talk a lot about this in simulations with our customers. Is to oversimplify, you can have an efficient supply chain or you can have an effective supply chain. And efficient supply chain is generally the cheapest for the company to run. But the more effective one is usually, the most responsive to customers and things like that. And if you want to move from efficient to effective, which is what we're talking about by being resilient, making them more effective, being able to respond more profitably to these disruptions. If you want to move from efficient to effective, you're going to have to spend money to do that. And eventually that makes its way to the finished product, right?
Yeah, I was just on a call with the Japan America Society did one on sustainability in manufacturing that was led by YKK, and they were talking about that very issue of like who's going to end up paying for the sustainability. And they, these companies were saying finally the consumer is now to the point where they don't just want it, but they're actually willing to fork over a little bit more. So, there's that equation you have to figure out. You can make it a feel-good process and, make it very environmentally efficient, but it's also generally in the short term, at least, going to raise the cost. So who's going to end up footing the bill for that? And do consumers care enough to pay more?
Well, there's that part. There is that part, but then that cascades into economic performance. And, in which countries will people be willing to carry the burden of doing that?
Right.
And in which places, in the United States, we will only carry this burden so long. We have a very short, so both on the CFO perspective and the market perspective, but also just as consumers in general. So, and I think that's just a very big complexity in all of this.
Yeah.
Before we spend, as we spend all these investments to be resilient, I think that's the context we have to keep in mind.
Well, we have to also think about the fact that we're offloading some of the processes that are dirtier and more destructive to other places in the world that we don't want to come back or we can't have come back because we now have regulations against those things, but we're happy to import them too. So it's like, all these considerations. Jorge, were you going to bring somebody in?
No, I was just going to ask Marco if he have seen this. He's working with a lot of manufacturers. I mean, the companies have presence in different places. So if this discussion it's been going on in the circles that IDOM or Point A has been involved with.
So just 1 second, we're at the top of the hour, so we're gonna delay last call to whenever the conversation fades. But if you need to leave, you have another meeting, then please feel free to do that. And we will share the recording with everyone. So feel free to stay, feel free to leave.
Actually, I have a hard call, but just to answer quickly, it is true that we're perceiving, a strong trend of this reshoring strategy in, many companies, both in Europe and here in the US. So they are looking into, investing heavily in building infrastructure, manufacturing infrastructure back in the Western world. So that's a clear trend.
I wanted to bring in Ani. Ani's later this month going to be hosting a conference that's going to be talking about a lot of issues. Do you want to talk about the UIBS conference, Ani?
Thank you, Trevor. Everybody, you're invited to join 11th US India Business Summit and 26th Georgia Tech Global Business Forum. We have a lot of these issues we are going to be discussing. Scott is also going to be one of our speakers, and what we are experiencing now, we're trying to give a very short-term answer to a very complex problem, as Scott and David alluded to. And one important factor which I would like to throw in is about the training and retraining of the skilled force, which Scott mentioned. It's going to be very challenging for us to create that kind of workforce, which is going to deal with very highly sophisticated supply chain resilience patterns like AI, etc. And only time can tell which direction we are going to go. And mind you, so many US companies have filed lawsuits against the current Trump administration. So I don't know which way we are going to go in terms of these trade and tariff war.
Yeah, and there's certainly geopolitical concerns that seem to be percolating here too. Like India seems to be rising in the consciousness of at least the U.S. administration, if not the companies. But as a diversification play versus China, really not there yet in terms of the workforce from a manufacturing perspective, but really one of the only places you could conceive of getting to a scale that may potentially rival China. But Regina, I wanted to ask you about the workforce issue. You and I have run into some really interesting workforce training initiatives as we've visited factories. But my understanding of it is that availability of skilled workforce is always a challenge for everybody in the U.S. and that partially it has to do with the positioning of manufacturing as a field of employment for young people. And the Germans have done a lot to focus on apprenticeship, but really it's not something that's scaled yet, and gotten into the consciousness of young people just yet. But what are you seeing about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Trevor. And only for a couple of months this year, probably March and April, maybe, did health and safety take surge past workforce as being the prime number one concern of manufacturers. And yes, there's still, and what we've seen is that as in prior years, the unfortunate thing is socioeconomics of the area that a manufacturer is located in drive the workforce challenges. And as you and I have seen in areas that may have a lower socioeconomic standard of living, the economics of the area, goes the pay, goes the standard of living, goes challenges with that, and bringing students in. When you have a 36% high school graduation rate, you're not going to get, workers that can even pass a basic test. So what we're seeing now is a resurgent back to diversifying workforce pipelines. And and just as many companies are now that were even talking about it before and considering or saying, oh yeah, let's look at that second chance program that CKS Packaging is using. Or hey, what about that great German apprenticeship, the group down in Noonan that has that fantastic German apprenticeship program that they have. Or someone like, there are so many great examples, but there are some other groups. Veterans is another one. And the other one that is really coming back are retired workforce, people who retired a little earlier than they anticipated, and now they want to do something, and they're willing to come back, and they want to come back, maybe not full time, but 10, 15, 20 hours a week is a huge, tremendous help to manufacturers. So yes, that has been the silver lining, is that companies that before said, you know what, we'll figure this out on our own, kind of, or maybe we'll talk about that next year, are now looking at it and saying, yeah, now's the time, we're going to do it. Who can you connect us with? So that's kind of been a good thing. And the other thing that we know, if you all, and I'm fairly certain you all are connected to the technical college system, they've seen a surge in connectivity there with their communities because a number of ways. Hospitality workers have come into the industry displaced there. We have a large number here in Georgia. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, Trevor, but it's still there, and people are now willing to look.
Well, I think companies are being more proactive about building like you said, building their own pipeline, because if it's not there, you got to build it, or you're just going to run out of supply. So I just was on one again with the Japanese, and they were talking about how a company in Cartersville funded a mechatronics program at the local college and career academy, and Kia has done a lot with the Think Academy down in LaGrange. So even the foreign companies are now coming in saying, oh wow, well, we need to make sure we have people, a steady pipeline coming into the workforce, and we're willing to foot the bill for that because we made this long-term investment. So Scott, do you see in your US factories, since you have a view on Asia and other places around the world and how competitive those plants are, what kind of adjustments are you having to make to your U.S. factories when you're trying to integrate them into these global supply chains and make them more competitive?
Good question. On the integration front, the biggest thing that we're doing is a lot of these operations aren't particularly good at measuring how they do things. So we've got a pretty big breadth of key performance indicators that looks at how they do in quality and inventory turns and manufacturing efficiency and how they're running their equipment. There's a lot of different things that we look at. And so that's the first thing we always, with every acquisition, is we implement all these KPIs, and all that gets fed into this. We've got a common dashboard that we built through Power BI, which allows them to see how they're performing in each of those areas relative to the other sites. And then that creates this kind of internal competition and creates some alignment that drives improvement. And so we're pretty excited about what we're seeing there. And the other thing that we do, which we're finding a lot of the companies, and this is just a culture of ours, is we're very transparent around our performance throughout the entire organization. And we always make sure that we have incentives that go all the way down to the factory floor based on achieving certain results. And that is something that's also, so we're trying to buy underperforming factories, with 200 to 300 employees and, that modestly profitable. And because we want to get really good at turning them into much more successful organizations. And so that's been the trend. And, so far, with the ones that this is heavy lifting, it's a lot of hard work. And culturally, we've got managers and so forth that we inherit that just struggle with that struggle with, understanding how to use an ERP system or MRP and just don't want to adapt to these things. And so, that's all just hard work to make those kinds of changes.
Yeah. So no simple answers here to a complex question of how to become more resilient in our supply chains. I mean, I think this was really interesting. I really appreciate Scott and David in particular, but everybody for joining. And Jorge, did you want to close this out?
I just want to, on behalf of Global Atlanta and the Pendleton Group, I just want to thank everybody for their participation. Great conversations. The beauty of this roundtable is what I call is where global connectivity meets our traded sectors, and that thought and this venues allows us to have this conversation and to grow and learn more what's going on and be able to influence and leverage the group that comes together to find solutions. So thank you very much. It's a testament that we've gone over 10 minutes and we're still engaged in conversation. So great.
Yeah.
Good job, Trevor. And thank you.
Still want to be respectful of y'all's time, and hopefully we'll get you back for the next one. Thank y'all for participating.
Thank you, Consul General, and Scott and David. And everybody.
Enjoyed it, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be safe.
Thank you.